Okay, I am hoping that we are recording. All right, so we're going to do Clinton. We're going to do three headings here. I've got a 60 minutes video that I like to show with Clinton. Um, so I'm going to make sure I got the lecture out to you, and then if I can get that done, then I'll send a little 60 minutes blurb that I think's awfully good. But let's get this taken care of first. All right, so let's go to presentation here. Okay, so Clinton considered himself to be a new Democrat. So he had to be a different kind of Democrat than the Democrats he felt like of the 60s and the 70s. I mean, Carter was pretty centrist, but especially the Democrats, the Lyndon Johnson and, the perception of the Democratic Party, that was kind of the big spending kind of hippie party. So he's kind of like Nixon had been. Nixon had been a Republican, kind of acts like a Democrat because you've had all these Democrats getting elected. So now you've got this Democrat trying to win the presidency at a time that Republicans have been getting elected. So Clinton forms this centrist group called the Democrat Leadership Council, or the DLC. And so they're just calling them, he wants to be a different kind of Democrat, not so liberal, not so left wing. All right. His campaign slogan was "It's the economy, stupid." That was come up with a guy, with his campaign manager, a guy named James Carville from Louisiana, known as the Raging Cajun. And the point was, that's the only thing Clinton had a chance on. If he talked about foreign policy, well, everybody just saw Bush as this masterful commander in chief, right? Had this big win in the Gulf War. And the American people at the time were really kind of with the Republicans on family values. Bush's vice president, a guy named Dan Quayle, that's him down there on the bottom right, really talked a lot about family. He was a figure a lot like Mike Pence, big on family values, very religious, and made a point of criticizing a TV comedy called Murphy Brown, where the main character decided to be a single mother. She wasn't married, she decided to have a baby. So very critical of kind of Hollywood was the focus. So, I mean, he's 1 for 3, right? The economy's bad. The Republicans kind of have culture, and the Republicans have foreign policy. So he's got to keep everybody focused on the economy if he's going to have a chance. Well, he wins in part because there's a guy named Ross Perot, a billionaire businessman who's pretty conservative, who runs, saying if he gets elected, he'll reduce the deficit. And so Perot kind of pulls off votes from the Republicans. The people voted for Perot probably would have voted for Bush. And so for that reason, Clinton wins. I mean, you only got to get 270 electoral votes to win. So Clinton wins a Democratic majority in both houses. Okay, it's pretty good. And if you read this chapter, the Clinton chapter, this is a good question. This is a quote from Clinton. Thing with Clinton is, you never really knew if he meant what he was saying. He had the nickname Slick Willie. We're going to try to show you a film that goes with that. Okay, so it's a pretty good little question there. All right. Let's see. Okay, so once he gets elected, the liberal stuff he does, a lot of time it's either symbolic or it doesn't work. One of those two things. So the symbolic stuff is the people he appoints to his cabinet. Lots of women and minorities on the cabinet. And then Congress in 1992, controlled by the Democrats, the most diverse Congress ever, with the most women and minorities in Congress ever. He nominated the second lady to the Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ginsburg's still on the Supreme Court. She's got cancer. Everybody's kind of watching. If she was to no longer to be able to serve on the Supreme Court, President Trump would be able to nominate a conservative judge to replace her. So everybody's kind of watching Ginsburg now because she's been on there since 1993, something like that. Clinton enacts, he gives an executive order called Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which meant that homosexuals and lesbians could serve in the military. They just couldn't serve openly. So as long as they didn't identify themselves as gay, they could still serve. And at the time, today that's just seen as conservative, almost. But at the time, it was seen really, really liberal. So the gay rights movement has really, really moved. Gay marriage really, really moved quickly, in the last generation. But at the time, that was seen as almost a radical proposal. And so Clinton took a lot of heat on that, kind of like Carter took heat on the Panama Canal Treaty, right? This symbolic thing really makes him seem very liberal. His wife, Hillary Clinton, tried to get a health care plan. She introduced a health care plan. Now, she wasn't in Congress. So the fact that she kind of came up with a plan and got other congressmen to introduce in Congress was pretty controversial. At any rate, the Clintons couldn't get this health care plan passed. So, I mean, things started out for kind of rough for Clinton his first 2 years. He was able to reduce the deficit. When Bush left off, the deficit was something like $300 billion. We were spending that much more money than we were taking in tax money. So Clinton got Congress to raise taxes a little, cut spending a little bit. And over time, by the time Clinton left office, we had a budget surplus. Okay, Clinton wanted to crack down on crime. All right, so he's going to do a couple of things about crime. One seen as kind of liberal today, one is seen as pretty conservative today. So kind of interesting. I mean, times have just changed. But Congress under Clinton passed something called the Brady Bill, which is a ban on assault weapons. Jim Brady was Reagan's press secretary who got shot and paralyzed the same day that Reagan got shot, that assassination attempt. And so Reagan supported this thing, and so it was a 10-year ban on assault weapons, weapons that you can shoot real fast. He also passed a crime bill, 3 strikes and you're out, saying that, repeat offenders would go to prison for a long time. And so, I mean, today, President Trump sees the Brady Bill as way too liberal, and then has let some of the people that went to prison as a result of this crime bill out of prison. So President Trump is kind of to the right of the Brady Bill and to the left of the crime bill, strangely enough. So things just kind of changed. There were a number of kind of disasters that took place during the early Clinton years. There was a guy who bombed a federal building in Oklahoma City. Lots of federal employees the guy hated the government. He was a Gulf War vet. And he killed a lot of people there in that federal building, Oklahoma City, including this little baby that was in a daycare center. There was a guy named David Koresh, kind of had a cult called the Branch Davidians down in Waco, Texas. And they kind of saw him as a Messiah figure. He was marrying some of the kids. It was polygamous. And they were hoarding illegal weapons. And so the FBI tried to get him out. A federal agency called the ATF tried to come get the weapons. And ATF agents got killed. And so then the FBI goes in there, and there's this standoff for like 30 days. And so finally the FBI goes in with tear gas, and somehow or another, very controversial, the building catches on fire. Everybody in there gets killed. And so, I mean, big disaster for the FBI, because kids were in there. They got killed too. All right, and then finally, Columbine is our first big school shootings taking place in the Clinton years. All right, so Clinton wasn't real popular his first 2 years, so the Republicans won the midterms. They took over both houses of Congress. The Republican Speaker of the House was a guy named Newt Gingrich. He's from Georgia, and he came up with something called the Contract with America that cut taxes and wanted to enact a lot of Republican programs. And Clinton and Gingrich couldn't agree on what the budget should be, so they shut down the government for a time over the budget. Eventually, Gingrich and Clinton worked pretty well together on some centrist legislation, and they changed welfare. They replaced the aid to families with dependent children that had been around since the time of Roosevelt with something called temporary aid to needy families that put time limits on welfare. And over time, the number of people on welfare was cut in half. So, almost conservative legislation signed into law by Clinton there. All right. So I'll take a break and I'll breathe for a second. All right. And we'll go to number 2. Okay. Clinton got reelected in 1996 by running against Gingrich in Congress. Now, Gingrich and the Republicans in Congress don't mean that much to you because you weren't around back then. But it'd be like if Trump gets reelected by running against Nancy Pelosi. Right? So Trump's relationship with Nancy Pelosi, fairly similar to Clinton's relationship with Gingrich. Eventually, Gingrich's going to end up impeaching him, not yet. So in other words, Clinton got reelected by talking about Congress and the Republicans in Congress. All right, his second term, pretty conservative. Again, stuff he's doing pretty, centrist or conservative. He passes. He negotiates the North American Free Trade Agreement. The Congress ratifies it. Free trade between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Increased immigration. Free movement also. The economy's really booming during the Clinton years. Peace and prosperity. In foreign policy, there's a certain amount of success. There's some controversies. When Bush left office, he had sent troops into Somalia for humanitarian reasons. There were people starving to death in Somalia. And gangs in Somalia captured some American soldiers and killed some American soldiers. And so when Clinton comes into office, he pulls the troops out of Somalia and reached the conclusion that sending troops into an African country for purely humanitarian purposes was a mistake. Well, along comes Rwanda. In Rwanda, you got this civil war where there's these two tribes. The Hutus overthrow the government led by the Tutsis, and then they start... It's a genocide committed largely with machetes, and so if you see the scars on this guy's head, and I mean Clinton could have stopped it. The American military can certainly defeat an African tribe with machetes, but his Somalia experience convinced him to stay out of it. When he left office, Clinton said his biggest regret was staying out of Rwanda. He felt like that was a mistake to just kind of sit back and let that genocide happen. He was able to put the democratically elected president of Haiti back into power. That's him right there. The guy's name was Aristide. And he got Slobodan Milosevic. Remember we talked about him with Bush overthrown. He stopped the ethnic cleansing with an air war. He didn't have to send in troops there just by bombing the Serbs. Overthrew Slobodan Milosevic. And he had some success making peace in the Middle East between the Palestinians and Israel. And this was a big moment where the leader of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, shook the leader of the PLO's hand. The guy's name was Yasser Arafat. Rabin was assassinated in Israel for making peace with the Palestinians. Clinton was unsuccessful in coming up with a resolution to who should own what land in Israel, and what a Palestinian state should look like. So ultimately, tried hard to get Middle East peace, but there's still a lot of problems in the Middle East. So he wouldn't call that a success. All right, so here comes the impeachment. During that government shutdown with Monica Lewinsky, with Gingrich. When the government shuts down, it doesn't spend near as much money. And the only people that show up for work are unpaid folks in a lot of cases. And so during that period of time, Clinton met this unpaid intern named Monica Lewinsky. And so then they started an affair. the affair got out. He broke up with her. She started talking to a friend of hers over the phone who taped the conversation. The friend was not a Clinton fan. And so then Clinton agreed to testify about it. You know, there's a special counsel appointed. They subpoenaed Clinton, and he agreed to testify. And, you know, they caught him in lies, you know, while he was testifying. So he got impeached for perjury and obstruction of justice. He tried to get Monica Lewinsky to lie about it. Tried to get his secretary to lie about it. So he got impeached in the House, just the way Trump just got impeached in the House, and the vote, like in the Senate, wasn't really very close. And so there he is after the impeachment trial is over. The Clinton family's going to Camp David, the presidential retreat. Let's take note that Clinton's daughter is standing between them, the Clintons. And the famous thing about this, it said that the daughter kept the marriage together during that period. And it said that the only member of the family that wasn't mad at Clinton in that picture was the dog. Okay. The effect of it was that cynicism about our government went up, or another way to put it is trust in our government went down again. You know, in the 50s, everybody trusted the government. Like 90% of Americans trusted the government. So that starts going down with the body counts in Vietnam and further down with Watergate. And so now it just goes down even further. And so people feel like, you know, they just couldn't trust the government. They're very cynical about their government. Okay, let me take a breath. This is my second take with this thing. Hopefully this time it's taping. I sure hope so. All right, let's do Bush then. All right, pretty good questions there. If you want to pause, take a look at them, do some practice. All right, okay, here comes Bush. So Bush runs in 2000 against Clinton's Vice President Al Gore. And like Trump, he lost the popular vote, and everything came down to Florida. And nobody could tell who won Florida. Gore wouldn't concede that he had lost Florida, and so he asked for a recount. The Florida Supreme Court calls for a recount. So they're recounting these ballots, and the problem is you can't tell if somebody voted on one of these things. There's a punch card ballot. So if you punch the little box right there, and then the little thing in the box that's called a Chad is just hanging out of there, well, has somebody voted or have they not? So the result was, you know, you got like, it was, how long was it? It was like, I want to say it was like 6 weeks. Maybe not that long, maybe 2 weeks, but nobody knew who was going to be president for a while. Let's say a month. Let's split the difference there. But the Supreme Court stops the recount, and there was a majority of Republicans on the Supreme Court, so that was very controversial. But the official final count was that Bush won the Electoral College 271 to 266. You got to win 270 electoral votes to win. He won the state of Florida by 537 votes. There was a third-party candidate, Ralph Nader, who was very liberal, a member of the Green Party, that's a party to the left of the Democrats, who won way more than 537 votes in Florida. So if he hadn't run, you know, Gore would have won Florida and Gore would have won the election. So here you go. You know, third parties kind of spoiling things for their own side there. Okay, as president, Bush wanted to be a compassionate conservative. So kind of like Clinton was going to be a new Democrat who was pretty close to the middle. Bush wanted to be a compassionate conservative, somebody who was conservative but cared about, you know, those who were having a hard time, cared about fighting poverty, maybe in conservative ways. So again, in certain ways, he wants to be kind of centrist, not quite as conservative as Reagan. Now, on cultural issues, pretty conservative. He was against stem cell research. He wanted religious people to be able to, especially faith-based prison initiatives, church groups that go and try to help poor people, and the government would pay these church groups, or church groups that go into prisons and try to help guys get their lives turned around, and the government would give aid to these church groups. He didn't want any support. He was pro-life on abortion, didn't want any support for abortion in any family planning clinics. He cut taxes, you know, to stimulate the economy. The economy was strong when he took office. But once 9/11 comes along and he's going to increase military spending, it's going to bring back those deficits. And we've had them ever since. Okay, here's 9/11. Eight months into his presidency, 3,000 victims. That's roughly equivalent to Pearl Harbor, from 60 different countries. Okay, the person that did it was Osama bin Laden. He was part of the leader of a terrorist group called Al Qaeda. He had been operating in Afghanistan. You know, he was one of the Mujahideen that we gave aid to during the Carter years. He did it for two reasons. He was mad at the United States for two reasons. Number one, same reason all terrorist groups that don't like the United States in the Middle East. He resented our support for Israel. All right, number two was that we put during the Gulf War, we put troops in the Holy Land. That's Mecca. It's during the holy month of Ramadan. And, you know, so our troops getting ready to go into Kuwait were in Mecca. And so he was angry about that. All right, so Bush invades Afghanistan about a month after 9/11. Wasn't long after, maybe 6 weeks. Overthrew the Taliban fairly easily. Very, very popular military invasion. Everybody wanted to get bin Laden. So strong consensus behind the invasion of Afghanistan. The thing's going to be controversial is going to be Iraq, but that won't be the next time. Okay, everybody keep your fingers crossed, because this is my second time doing this thing, and I don't know what I forgot to do last time, but let's hope. There'll be a dot up there for me to click when I hit escape, and hopefully it's less than 30 minutes too. Oh, look at there. There's that dot. And I'm just stupid and forgot to do it right last time. Okay, this will end it once I click the dot.